Hello and welcome back to Storytime with Sig. That's on Sig Storytime. I'm of course Sig, and today we are covering three different stories: missing people, missing person story, and they're gonna kind of be a little all over the place location wise, but these were three that were actually recommended to me during one of my live streams over this past weekend, and was informed I should look into them, and I found them kind of interesting. So I wanted to bring more light to them, and hopefully, if anybody knows anything or has any more information, they can, contact the proper authorities to help out with this. But with that being said, let's get into it. It was September 20th, 1988, a beautiful sunny day in Belen, New Mexico. Tara Calico, who's 19, decided to go out for her daily bike ride at approximately 9:30 that morning. Normally, the beautiful teen would ride with her mother, but there had been an incident where her mother had felt they were followed by a motorist and she no longer felt comfortable going along. She encouraged Tara to carry Mace, but Tara had told her mother no. The ride typically took 2 hours. Jokingly, Tara asked her mother, Patty Dole, to come and get her around noon if she got a flat tire and had not returned. Tara had plans to play tennis with her boyfriend at 12:30 p.m., giving her plenty of time to finish her ride. Tara took her mother's neon pink Huffy mountain bike and left their house to ride her regular route on New Mexico State Road 47. The only thing Tara took was her Sony Walkman, her headphones, and a cassette tape of the band Boston. When Tara did not return, Patty went out looking for her, driving Tara's usual route. When she returned home and Tara was not there, Patty called the Valencia County Sheriff Department and made a missing person report. Later that day, officers found pieces of Tara's Walkman along with the cassette tape scattered along the side of the road, and Tara and her bike were nowhere to be found. An extrovert, an avid reader, and physically active, Tara worked as a bank teller and was studying to become either a psychologist or a psychiatrist. She was highly motivated and would never leave without telling her mother. Witnesses came forward and said they saw an older model white and light colored pickup truck with a camper shell in the area of New Mexico 47. They said they saw it following Tara on the return leg of her trip. Witnesses even said the passenger was an 18-year-old son of an influential local law enforcement officer. In 2007, the News Bulletin article Valencia Sheriff Renee Rivera said several witnesses had told him that the two young men in the truck had been following Tara trying to talk to her while grabbing at her, and the truck hit the bicycle, knocking her to the ground. There have been other reports too. In November 2013, a police report was filed detailing a dying confession of a witness who had identified three men, including the officer's son, as being involved in Tara's disappearance. The bicycle was reportedly thrown in the Belen junkyard and Tara's body thrown into a pond by the young men. There had also been reports that Tara had been raped, stabbed to death, buried, and covered with slabs of concrete. In another story, Tara had been placed in a freezer, and all heartbreaking and traumatic for Tara's parents to hear. Police have dug up possible grave sites around Belen and Valencia County with no results. According to the Albuquerque Journal article, the son of the officer died at age 21 during 1991, the result of a suicide or playing a game of Russian roulette that went awry. However, the father of the young man told the Journal he believed his son was murdered. On June 15, 1989, a Polaroid picture of the unidentified young woman and a little boy was found in a parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida. In the picture, both victims were gagged with duct tape and bound with their arms behind their back. The color photograph was in good condition. Both victims faced the camera and appeared to be in the back of a van in obvious distress. Police consulted with Polaroid consulted with Polaroid, who told investigators the pictures had been taken after May 1989 because the film had not been available before that date. The woman who found the photograph described the vehicle as a white Toyota cargo van without windows that had been parked in the spot before she pulled in at the store. Investigators reported the woman remembered a man driving as being in his 30s with a mustache. Port St. John is a small community of only about 10,000 people in 1989. Police had set up roadblocks, but the man was never identified. In 1989, a photograph made national news and broadcast on the show A Current Affair. After it aired, friends who had seen the show called Patty and told her that they thought the girl in the photograph resembled Tara. Relatives of Michael Henley, who's 9 years old, also saw the episode and thought the little boy in the photograph resembled Michael. The little boy had been missing since April of 1988 from New Mexico. Tara and Michael's parents met with detectives. Patty left the police department convinced the young woman in the photo was her daughter. She noted a scar on the unidentified woman's leg was identical to an injury Tara had sustained in a car accident. In addition, a paperback book of the V.C. Andrew, My Sweet Andronia, I butchered that, I'm so sorry, was lying next to a woman and Tara's favorite author. Scotland Yard analyzed the photograph and concluded the woman was Tara, but a second analysis by the Los Alamos National Laboratory disagreed with the Scotland Yard. The FBI and the analysis of the photograph was inconclusive. Michael Henley had gone missing while turkey hunting with his father in 1988, about 75 miles from where Tara was abducted. Her mother and father were convinced the Polaroid was of their son. However, there is now considered highly unlikely. His remains were eventually discovered in June of 1990 in the Zuni Mountains, about 7 miles where he had vanished. 2 other photographs had surfaced over the years, and Tara's family has had to try to identify each one as if it in a bad nightmare. The first photograph was found near a construction site in Montecito, California, and blurry photograph of the girl's face with tape covering her mouth and light blue stripped fabric behind her, similar to a pillow in the original Toyota van photograph. It was taken on a Polaroid film that was not available until June 8, 1989. The second shows a woman bound in gauze, her eyes covered with more gauze, and large black framed glasses with unidentified male on the Amtrak train. The film was not available until February 1990. Tara's mother believed the one with the striped fabric, was her daughter, but thought the other might have been a bad gag. Tara's sister, Michelle, stated, "They had striking resemblance as, for me, I will not rule them out. But keep in mind, our family has had to identify many other photographs, and all but those were ruled out." In 2009, Port St. Joe Police Chief David Barnes received 2 envelopes postmarked June and August 9, 2009, from Albuquerque, New Mexico. One letter contained a photograph printed on copy paper of a young boy. Someone had drawn a black band in ink over the boy's mouth, seemingly depicting the gag in 1989. The second letter contained the original image of the boy with no gag. On August 12th, the Star newspaper in Port St. Joe received a third letter from Albuquerque with the same image of the boy with a black marker gag over his mouth. None of the letters had return addresses or a note that would indicate the child's identity. Authorities in Port St. Joe believe the photograph of the young boy has something to do with Tara's abduction, but remains a mystery still. Tara's mother, Patty, and her father, John Dole, have since passed away. Before her death, Patty suffered several strokes and would stare out of a window in Florida's retirement home where she lived with Tara's father. She would wait each day for her daughter to ride by on her bicycle. Even though they were living 2,000 miles away from where Tara had vanished, Patty would look through her window and wonder if the woman riding by was her daughter. With Patty's passing, it seemed like the end of the search for Tara. Patty and John had been the force behind the continued search for Tara, even becoming deputized so they could conduct their own searches and send out thousands of flyers throughout the country. Patty worked with the National Center for Missing Adults and appeared on several national television shows raising awareness of her daughter's disappearance. According to Albuquerque's Journal in 2013, a six-person task force of local and federal law enforcement officers was created to re-examine the case of the University of New Mexico sophomore. A year later, the task force was dismantled. That is when Michelle Dole, Tara's younger sister, took up where her mother had left off, teaming up with Melinda Esquivel, I butchered that, I'm so sorry, who had also known Tara as a member of the Belen High School marching band. They started a new journey together with a common goal: to find Tara. Tara states her mom had sent her an article from Valencia County's news bulletin in 2008 about how Tara had been missing for 20 years, and she just started crying. Melinda told Rosalia Rayburn of Albuquerque Journal that happening had traumatized the community and had kind of changed how the family felt about their safety in that community, and they couldn't wrap their minds around what happened to Tara. Melinda Bully lives in Los Angeles and worked in the entertainment industry and was intrigued by the case. During Christmas 2008, Melinda went home to Belen and had dinner with an old friend where she brought up the Tara's disappearance. She was jolted by the response. They said, "Oh, Melinda, the whole town knows who did it." Melinda told the Albuquerque Journal that. Her friends were referring to the young boys who had been driving the truck and the son of the prominent law enforcement officer. At that moment, Melinda realized she had to do something to find Tara. Melinda began working on a documentary about Tara's disappearance and launched a podcast called Vanish, the Tara Calico Investigation, that has been downloaded over 1 million times. In addition, Melinda and Michelle also launched a website and Vanish, the Tara Calico story page on Facebook that has nearly 7,000 followers. Melinda and Michelle are realistic. After so many years have passed, both women know officials are unlikely to further investigate the case without a body. However, they both set out to finish what Patty Dole started, to bring Tara home for a proper burial and to receive justice that she deserves. On the morning of December 23rd, 1974, 3 girls from 3 different families set out on a shopping trip to the then rather glitzy Seminary South Shopping Center in South Fort Worth. They were supposed to be home by 4 p.m., but they never returned. Rachel, who was 17, picked up her friend Renee, who was 14, and when little Julianne, who lived across the street from Renee's grandmother, begged to go along, the older girls said she had to get permission first. Julianne was only 9 that morning and simply did not want to spend the day alone. She persuaded her mother to let her go. The mystery surrounding the disappearance continues to confound law enforcement officials, while it haunts and tangles the lives of all the families involved. For some, time stopped that day on December. For others, the tragedy created a seedbed of suspicion and now divides a sister from a brother and a mother from a son. It is a chasm no bridge can span, a riddle with no answer. It is a constant grieving. Just after the disappearance, the families walked creek beds and county roads looking for their missing children. Psychics and pranksters called. Private investigators poked into the case. The police chased 100 empty leads. The slow days stretch into long years, and the puzzle of the missing girls remains unsolved. Winters turned into summers and back again, and still the families waited for answers. What happened to the children, and why did it happen? One thing's for sure, says Renee Mosley, the mother of the youngest missing girl. Somebody knows, and somebody knows for sure what happened. Rayanna, there we go, is right. For 25 years, someone has lived knowing the truth and never whispered a word. Somebody has kept the secret. When 14-year-old Renee Wilson went to her grandmother's house on Gordon Street that December morning in 1974, she wore a red and white sneakers and pale yellow-green t-shirt with "Sweet Honesty" printed across the front. Her shoulder-length hair had a hint of red and a mind of its own. She probably hadn't planned on going shopping, but when her longtime friend Rachel Arnold, Trissa, a married high school student with a car, called and suggested a trip to Seminary South, Renee was game. Rachel and Renee had been friends for years. Their families camped and fished together, but Rachel hadn't known Julie Ann very well at all. Julie Ann and her family lived across the street from Renee's grandmother, where Renee stayed when her mother worked at the dry cleaners. Renee knew all the Mosley children. In fact, she had a crush on Julie Ann's older brother, Terry. That very morning, Terry had surprised Renee with a delicate promise ring. He'd slipped the little ring on her finger and vowed to love her forever. He remembers now with an embarrassed grin. Terry, who's now 41, was 15 at the time. With long brown hair and devil-may-care attitude, the girls asked him to go shopping, but he shook his head no. He wanted to see a sick friend instead. Renee was determined to be back by 4 p.m. so she could have plenty of time to primp for a Christmas party that night, a party Terry was going to attend with her. The girls set out before noon. They stopped at the Army-Navy store to retrieve some layaways and then traveled to the Seminary South, what is now Fort Worth Town Center, where they parked the old 98 on the upper level near Sears. Several people remember seeing them in the mall. A few remember Renee's Sweet Honesty t-shirt. Apparently they made it back to the car. Their Christmas purchases were found locked inside. But what happened next? The woman told a store clerk that she saw some men hustle the girls into a pickup truck. Police never located this witness. Another said the girls had been spotted in a security patrol car. In 1981, years after the disappearance, a man said he had been in the parking lot that day and he had seen a man forcing girls into a van. The man in the van told him it was a family dispute and he needed to stay out of it. The eyewitness accounts raised a mountain of questions, but not one answer at all. Did the girls leave with someone they knew? Did they split up? Little Julianne going with one person and the old girls going with another? If they were running away, would they leave their clothes they just got from layaway in a car? Was there a conspiracy, a setup, a plan to get one of the girls? All of them? Did something innocent take a sinister twist? What happened? Where did it go? And who knows these secrets? At first, police officers said the girls had simply ran away, but their parents protested. As if to document the police's theory, a letter arrived the next morning. It was addressed to Rachel's young husband, but the name on the envelope was a formal Thomas A. Trissa, not the familiar Tommy she always called him. Rachel was scrawled in the upper left-hand corner of the envelope. There were no city names on the postmark, only a blurred-out postal service number of 76083. Curiously, the 3 appears to be backwards. Maybe it's an unfinished 8, or perhaps the last 2 digits of the stamp were hand-loaded, as private investigator Dan James believes, and it is supposed to be 38. If it is 38, then it may have been stamped in Eliasville near Throckmorton. If it is 76088, then the letter may have been posted from Weatherford. The letter was a sheet of paper wider than the envelope, written in a childish scrawl, and it read, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears' upper lot. Love, Rachel." The original I on Rachel's name had been a short loop, L on Rachel's name had been a short loop that looked more like an E. The writer had gone back over it, making it a little taller of a loop. Rachel's mother, Fran Langston, never believed the letter came from her daughter. Rachel's husband, Tommy, now 47 and a supervisor with the East Texas Water Department, agrees. He never thought it came from Rachel. He said in a recent phone interview, handwriting experts are uncertain. Their tests are always inconclusive. While much of that day and the night before are a blur in his memory, Tommy is certain about the letter. He picked it up out of the mailbox himself. He says he believes the letter was sealed. He doesn't remember anything else in the box that day. No Christmas cards, no flyers, no bills, nothing. Just the letter. The 10-cent stamp had been canceled that morning, December 24th, 1974. Rusty Arnold was only 11 years old at the afternoon his sister Rachel disappeared, but he says that day has left an indelible mark on his life. Now 36, a local roofing contractor, Rusty is determined to discover the truth about the disappearance. He scratches and tears at the case almost daily in a dog pursuit that has ravaged his relationship with his older sister and his mother. When he was in his teens, Rusty and his older sister, Deborah Hopper, now 44, were allies. They often talked about the case and tried to solve the mystery. Deborah was 19 that December day, sitting in her living room sipping iced tea on a recent afternoon. She is pensive as she recalls that morning and the sadder milestones of her life. She made a lot of bad choices in her life, she admits with a sigh. She talks easily about a life filled with hurt and unhappy childhood, failed marriages, and brief stay in the detox center, but none is more painful than the wounds left by her sister's disappearance. Deborah and her sister had a special bond. According to Deborah, both girls were afraid of their father, who said to have had a hot temper. He was also a sick man who was dying of cancer at the time of the disappearance and was buried that summer. Deborah, a trim woman with long blonde hair, smooth skin, and round gray eyes, is herself an engaging mix of sunlight and shadows. It's no wonder that Tommy was attracted to her. They were even engaged for a short time. As a matter of fact, that's how Rachel met Tommy, but on this day, Deborah waves away the thought of serious relationship with Tommy. Deborah had been engaged, and but it wasn't a real engagement. Tommy, then only in his early 20s, had already lost both his parents and was a divorced father with a 2-year-old son. He and Rachel had been married only about 6 months when Deborah had an argument with her boyfriend and moved in for a short stay with the newlyweds. Even given their history, Tommy says there was no uneasiness between them, and Deborah insists that the romance was long gone and over. She recalls Rachel woke her the morning of the disappearance and asked her to go shopping. Deborah stayed in bed instead. Deborah was there the next morning when Tommy took the letter out of the mailbox. By the spring of 1975, the families were frustrated by the police investigation, so they hired a flamboyant private investigator named Joe Swam. He called press conferences, forced the police to let him examine case files, and made headlines quickly. On Swam's word that he received an anonymous tip that the girls' remains could be found near Port Lavaca, 100 volunteers searched an overgrown swampy bayou. Police had searched there earlier, but with only a handful of people. Throughout the year, Swam kept the spotlight on the case and on himself, with the reports that an unidentified man had called trying to collect the reward the families had offered in exchange for information about the girls' whereabouts. Swam, however, died in 1974 of what was said to be a drug overdose. The death was ruled as a suicide, though. All his files, including the records of the case, were completely destroyed, just as he requested. That's suspicious. Deborah remembered that over the months and even years following disappearance, psychics wrote troubling letters saying the girl's body had been dumped here, there, and everywhere. The families followed every lead. Searchers combed through the Texas brush and explored hundreds of back roads. In 1975, a skeletal remain of a girl and a woman were found near San Antonio. For a time, the families thought the wait was over, but those bones had nothing to do with the case at all. In March 1976, a seer called Fort Worth police from Hawaii to say that the girl's body could be found near an oil well. For some reason, searchers focused on the area around Rising Star, a small community near Abilene, but nothing was found except oil wells. The same year, an oil company employee discovered human bones in a bog near Houston. The swampy landscape was dotted with oil derricks. The discovery led nowhere until the spring of 1981, when more bones were discovered in the same bog and a massive search was launched. Skeletal remains of 3 girls were found, but again, not these 3 missing girls. Rachel's mother, Fran, posted every newspaper article, pasted every news article in a scrapbook. Deborah and Rusty read and reread the clippings over and over. They talked late into the night, guessing that what might have happened. Rusty's childhood interest has developed into a zealous preoccupation. Tommy's letter holds particular interest to him. He is certain that Rachel did not write the letter. He is just as sure that Rachel, and only Rachel, is alive, and that it is only a matter of time, perhaps even days, before he finds her. Following the disappearance, there were several reports that the two older girls had been spotted in different locations: a gas station, near Walmart's, and a county store. If Rusty dismissed these reports as shams in the beginning, he became convinced that they were genuine after meeting private investigator Dan James. James says he has been following the case since about 1975. Rusty met him 20 years later. Rusty found James' name in a random search on the Yellow Pages as he was looking for a private investigator. To Rusty's surprise, James already knew plenty about the case, but better yet, James seemed as interested in solving the riddle of the disappearance as he did. Never hired by the families, James said he hasn't received a penny in compensation for his work. He has received death threats from anonymous callers warning him to stay away from the case. In December, he announced a $25,000 reward to be paid from his own pocket for the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible for the disappearance of the three girls. He has not set up a designated account for the reward, but says he is willing to write the check himself. He says his wife would not object to such a payment either. Does he expect someone will be able to claim the money? He smiles and shuffles his black boots against the floor. He thinks maybe. According to James, several credible witnesses say they spotted Rachel since the disappearance. One was in 1998 around Christmas. Rusty and James believe that Rachel visits Fort Worth during the Christmas season every year. James is careful with his words, but he maintains that someone is shrouding and manufacturing evidence, and what he says was at first an effort to keep the two older girls away. Now he thinks only Rachel survives. He is evasive about what he thinks happened or who he believes should be held accountable. He says, I believe that the person facilitates and maintains an effort to keep Rachel Arnold away from Fort Worth. I believe Renee Wilson is not alive, and I believe something dreadfully wrong and probably a fatality occurred involving Julianne. Rusty buys James' deduction, but neatly sidesteps on the record, comments himself, yes, he has a theory. No, he won't discuss it, except to say that someone close to the girls had something to do with the disappearance. He's sure of it. Deborah however, is more candid. She states, I know he blames me. I know he thinks I had something to do with it. Rusty thinks this letter that Tommy got the next day, he thinks I wrote it. I didn't write this letter. I didn't know who did. I don't know what happened to my sister. Maybe she got kidnapped and put into some type of traffic circle. That's the only thing that makes sense. I had nothing to hide, says Deborah. Tears filled her eyes when she talks about her sister and the ruined relationship with her brother. It's hard enough to deal with that. My sister is not here anymore. I had to go through lots and lots of counseling because of all the things that happened in my life. Rusty and Deborah and their mother live on the same South Side street, only a few doors apart, but the ties that bind the family are tattered. Their relationships are becoming apart at the seams. Fran blames James for poisoning Rusty's mind and says her family has been destroyed. Rachel's family is not the only one in chaos. The disappearance of little Julianne, who was only 9 that day, her family is also rocked as well. On a recent balmy November afternoon, her mother, Rayanne, settled into a recliner in a small North Richlands Hills apartment and made a joke about a hole in her sock as a black cat jumped onto her lap and a wind chime jangled in the distance. She says, I was working for an electrical contractor and my husband and I were separated. It was a bitter, bitter time. I remember that Julie cried and wanted to go to the Seminary South Mall. I told her, no, you don't have any money. You need to stay home. I knew Renee and her mother, but I really didn't know Rachel. But Julie kept whining that she wouldn't have anybody to play with. So finally I gave in, but told her to be home by 6. Of course, 6 came and went, and so did 7, 8, and 9 p.m. Anger gave way to worry. Rayanne doesn't remember much about that night. Somehow she got to go to the shopping center. She talked to the police. Somehow she got home. Like a breaker tripped in an electrical storm, Rayanne shut down. She retreated behind some dark walls in her mind. She plodded through the days, waited impatiently by the phone, closed herself off from any responsible movements, and quietly lost in her mind. Her world was as crazy as a crazy tilt-a-whirl twirling into shadowy universe only she would recognize. She lost her job, but got another. She states, I could go to work. I don't know how, but I couldn't do anything else. I had 2 other children who needed me, but I wasn't there for them. I wouldn't come home. I was honky-tonky around. She shifts in the recliner and strokes the cat's head, stating, I wish I hadn't been that way. I wish to God I could go back and change how I was, but I can't. For the next 2 decades, Rayanne visited psychologists and psychiatrists. She spent time in one hospital and then another. Finally, she began to keep journals and explore those deep thoughts. Henley, now 37, has grown into an adult. Their struggle... Oh, hold on. During all those last years, her other children, Terry and Janet Henley, who are now 37, have grown into adulthood. Their struggle to maturity was complicated by their mother's emotional and mental turmoil. Janet says she began selling beer and cigarettes at a little store when she was only 12. She dropped out of school and married early. Terry scrounged up work here and there where he could. Janet states, I can't recall our childhood. Terry remembers that he bought food and locked it in his closet so he'd have enough to eat. Janet often raided his stash. Married for 20 years to his high school sweetheart, Terry is now a quiet man who shows great pride in his son and speaks lovingly of his daughter. This stable home is, as he says, a hard-won prize. Julianne's disappearance had left a terrible scar, and Janet agrees. Things would have been different if it hadn't happened. My mother would have been there more. She has watched over us more, but this drove her to crazy. Janice talked about the disappearance of her sister. Renee's mother, Judy Wilson, still lives with her husband in the house that they lived the day the girls vanished. Now it has bars on the windows and an iron gate across the porch. She has forgotten bits and pieces of the events that day, but other things are clear as polished glass in her memory. As darkness settles over the city, she became frantic. She had the girls paged at all the stores in the shopping center. She called all the hospitals and all the police. Long before the shoppers went home, they found her car. For a while, Judy was angry with God. She's over that now, she says. She believes that all the girls are dead. It's easier that way. She cannot bear to think they have been tortured or abused for all these long years. Her and her husband, Richard, sheltered their only child, Ricky, from the curious. Now, 25 years later, Ricky prefers to keep his thoughts to himself and has yet to make remarks. The Wilsons have stayed busy, work to move on with their lives. Still, when the house is quiet and Judy lets her mind wander, the question wiggles up from the corners of her mind. What happened that December afternoon? Why, and who's keeping all these secrets? On January 2nd, 2000, Quinn finished work at 9 p.m. and planned to check on a Mitsubishi Eclipse he considered purchasing at a dealership with a former coworker, Robert Jason Owens. They drove in separate vehicles to the location. At approximately 9:15, the two were seen entering the Ebling Citgo gas station at Hendersonville Road to purchase sodas. They left several minutes later and were captured on the security camera heading in the direction of Long Shoals Road. Quinn never returned home that night. and has never been heard from again. On January 3rd, 2000, his mother filed a missing person report when he failed to show up to work the very next day and did not return her calls. The 22-year-old Robert Jason Owens was a co-worker of Quinn's, and the two occasionally played pool together. Owens told police that shortly after leaving the gas station, Quinn flashed his headlights to signal him to pull over. Quinn said he received a page and needed to return and left to go find a payphone. Quinn returned around 9:30, rear-ending Owens' truck. He promised to pay for the damage and said he had to leave, canceling their evening plans. The next morning, Owen failed to show up for work and said that he had been in a traffic accident the night before near the Waffle House restaurant on Long Shoals Road by the intersection of Interstate 26. He was treated at Urgent Care Center on Hendersonville Road for a head wound and fractured rib. No car accident report was filed that night, and his injuries were not consistent with that of a vehicle collision, according to police. On January 4, 2000, a Walmart supervisor received a call from a man pretending to be Quinn, saying he wouldn't be able to make it to work due to an illness. Questioning the unfamiliar voice, the supervisor traced the call back to a Volvo construction equipment plant. Owens worked at a Volvo industry and admitted to the police that he made the call because Quinn had asked him to. He declined to cooperate shortly after. Robert Jason Owens was considered a primary suspect in Zebb Quinn's disappearance, but police didn't have enough evidence to make the arrest. Before Quinn's disappearance, Quinn met and befriended a 19-year-old Misty Taylor at a Christmas party through his mother's fiance's restaurant. He soon became romantically interested in her, partly because she was in an abusive relationship with her boyfriend Wesley Smith. Quinn told his friends and family that his life had been threatened by Taylor's boyfriend because of his affection for her. In 2009, police gathered hair, fingerprints, and saliva samples from Taylor, but say that she was not considered a suspected person or interest. Police traced back the page Quinn received on that night of his disappearance to the residence of his paternal aunt, Ina. She denied having made the call and told the police she was having dinner at a friend's house, who happened to be Misty Taylor's mother. Misty and her boyfriend were also there at the dinner that night. She subsequently filed a police report claiming her house was broken into the night of Zebb Quinn's disappearance, while she was having dinner at her friend's house. On January 16, 2000, Quinn's 1990 Mazda Protege was discovered abandoned in the parking lot of Little Pig's Barbecue restaurant on McDowell Street 2 weeks after he went missing. On the rear window, a large pair of lips and an exclamation mark were drawn in orange-pink lipstick. Police found a hotel key card and a jacket, several empty drink bottles, and 3-month-old live Labrador puppy in the car. And none of these items could be linked to Quinn, and the police, unable to trace the hotel from the key card after checking the area's hotel and motels. The driver's seat was also set too close to the steering wheel to indicate it was a shorter person than Quinn that was driving the car. The car was found near Mission St. Joseph's Hospital, where Quinn's grandmother, mother, and sister all worked as nurses. Between 2002 and 2009, Owens spent about 23 months in state prison after a conviction for habitual impaired driving, speeding to elude arrest, assaulting an officer, resisting officers, reckless driving, and drunken disorderly conduct. On March 17, 2015, Owen was arrested and charged with the murder of former Food Network star contestant Christy Schoen Codd and her husband Joseph J.T. Codd and their unborn child in North Carolina. On April 27, 2017, Owen pled guilty to the 3 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of dismembering human remains. He was sentenced to 59 to 74 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He confessed that he killed the family by accidentally running them over and dismembered their remains to hide the bodies. On March 31, 2015, investigators unearthed fabric, leather material, and unknown hard fragments buried underneath a layer of concrete on Owens' property on Owens Cove Road in Leicester. An unknown white powder substance and pieces of metal and concrete were found at after digging up a concrete fish pond in the area. Plastic bags containing possibly pulverized lime and powdered mortar mix were found in another part of his property. On July 10, 2017, Owen was indicated by a Boncarm County grand jury indicted. There we go. Grand jury with first-degree murder of the death of Zebb Quinn. He is, however, waiting trial. Police found no evidence, means, or motive for foul play of Zebb Quinn's disappearance. Owens is currently serving a life sentence in prison and is waiting trial for the alleged murder. The circumstances of Zebb Quinn's disappearance remain unclear, and his case is currently classified as a homicide. His case remains unsolved. Well, there's the 3 stories. Zebb Quinn's story led to a really messed up event, but so jacked up. He deserved what he got, but not Zebb Quinn. Owen deserves what he got. But regardless, if you like these type of stories, whether you like mythical, paranormal, dark and gritty, missing people, military stories, whatever, make sure you leave a like and a comment. And then, of course, hit the subscribe button so where you can stay up to date with all future content coming out. And make sure you hit that bell icon as well so you get notified when I release another video. Other than that, everybody, I hope you enjoy this video. And if there's another story you'd like to have me research, let me know down in the comments below. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and take care.